Hey, I committed a victimless crime spree back in the day. I went in Keene, New Hampshire, the town I'm currently broadcasting from, and I smoked cannabis out in the central square, or attempted to. I was recording inside City Hall, got arrested for that. I was recording outside of a courthouse and was arrested for that. I was banned from all New Hampshire liquor stores forever for singing inside of them songs about ending prohibition, and lots of other things too. So you can check that out at victimlesscrimespree.com. Now, I filmed that movie from 2011 to 2012, and it came out in September of 2012. But did you know that in February of 2004, Vanity Fair's own Christopher Hitchens went on his own victimless crime spree? It's true. The headline, "I Fought the Law," to protest the petty ordinances of Mayor Bloomberg's New York. The author went on a one-man crime spree, taking his feet off his bike pedals, feeding pigeons, and sitting on a milk crate, among other offenses. Why are the people of America's most cosmopolitan city being treated like backward children? By Christopher Hitchens. Quote, "Many and various are the New York tales that are told of Professor Sidney Morgenbesser. During a conference on linguistic philosophers at Columbia University, he interrupted the pompous J.L. Austin, who was saying that while many double negatives express a positive, as in not unattractive, there is no example in English of a double positive expressing a negative." Morgenbesser's interjection took the form of two words. Yeah, yeah. Or it could have been, yeah, right. On another occasion, he put his pipe in his mouth as he was ascending the subway steps. A policeman approached and told him that there was no smoking on the subway. Morgenbesser explained, pointed out, might be a better term, that he was leaving the subway, not entering it, and had not yet lit up. The cop repeated his injunction. Morgenbesser reiterated his observation. After a few such exchanges, the cop saw that he was beaten and fell back on the old standby of feeble authority. "If I let you do it, I'll have to let everyone do it." To this, the old philosopher replied, "Who do you think you are, Kant?" And his last word was misconstrued, and the whole question of the categorical imperative had to be hashed out down at the precinct house. Morgenbesser walked. Have you ever broken the law? Well, we're about to hear the times when Christopher Hitchens broke the law, and he won. This is Peace News Now. Reading the words of sage, philosopher, writer, troublemaker, Christopher Hitchens at VanityFair.com. Words he penned over 10 years ago at VanityFair.com, where he's explaining how he went on a bit of a victimless crime spree of his own, inspired by one philosopher who was able to talk his way out of a ticket for lighting up on the subway. And he explains that, in my opinion, is the way that New York is supposed to be. Irony and a bit of sass, combined with a pugnacious independence, should always stand a chance against bovine officials who have barely learned to memorize such demanding mantras as zero tolerance and no exceptions. Today, the professor would be stopped, insulted, ticketed, and told that if he didn't like it, he could waste a day in court, or several days dealing with the bureaucracy, or both. Take the case of Brian Bowie, who owns the Mekong restaurant in Soho. Like everyone else, he's been deprived of the choice of allowing his customers to smoke. He lives under a city government that knows better about what's good for him and his clients, so smokers have to step outside. But is that the end of it? By no means. You see, there's no smoking allowed under an awning. So Mr. Bowie was fined $200 for allowing one of his guests to smoke in that space. But the awning was, at the time, retracted. "Never mind that," said the inspector who wrote the ticket. "There was a canopy involved." Thus, a hardworking Vietnamese was penalized for, in effect, having an awning in the first place. He was also told by the judge that he hadn't made a good faith effort to police his guests or to draw their attention to this anomaly. Upon the second occasion that he was cited, again at a time when the awning was retracted, Mr. Bowie went to court and won. But it cost him $3,000 in legal fees to prove that the health department and the city's judges were unclear on the law. In fact, the law these days is very clear. It states that New York City is now the domain of the mediocre bureaucrat, of the inspector with too much time on his hands, of the anal retentive cop with his nose in a rule book, of the snitch willing to drop a dime on a harmless fellow citizen, and a mayor who's the most pathetic and annoying figure, the micro-megalomaniac. The law-breaking itch is not always an anarchic one. In the first place, the human personality has, or ought to have, a natural resistance to coercion. We don't like to be pushed and shoved, even if it's in a direction we might choose to go. In the second place, the human personality has, or ought to have, a natural sense of the preposterous. Thus, just behind my apartment building in Washington, there's an official sign saying drug-free zone. I think this comic inscription may be because it's so close to a schoolyard. And a few years back, one of our suburbs announced by municipal ordinance that it was a nuclear-free zone. I don't wish to break the first law, and if I did wish to do so, it would make me or any other local resident no more than one phone call and a 10-minute wait. I did, at least, for a while, pine to break the nuclear-free regulation on grounds of absurdity alone, but eventually decided that it would be too much trouble. So, there are laws that are defensible and unenforceable, and then there are laws that are impossible to infringe. But in New York of Mayor Bloomberg, there are laws that are not possible to obey, and that nobody can respect, and that are enforced by arbitrary power. The essence of tyranny is not iron law. It is capricious law. Tyranny can be petty, and petty is not just Bloomberg's middle name. It is his name. In the space of a few hours late in November, I managed to break a whole slew of New York laws. That is to say, I sat on an upended milk crate, put my bag next to me on a subway seat, paused to adjust my shoe on a subway step, fed some birds in Central Park, had a cigarette in a town car, attempted to put a plastic frame around a vehicle license plate, and rode a bicycle without keeping my feet on the pedals at all times. I also had a smoke in a bar at a table in a restaurant. Only in the latter two cases would I hitherto have been knowingly violating a city ordinance. I decided that, partly to protect those who were with me or hosting me, I would not do anything to directly taunt the forces of law and order. I would be the Zelig of the scofflaws. So I took a bike to Central Park and, starting near the boathouse, rode it uphill until blood started to rush to my head and blackness to descend, i.e. for about a quarter of a mile. I then turned and coasted down, allowing the brisk air of a crisp fall day to whoosh disturbingly up my trouser legs as I lifted my feet into the air. I compounded the offense by having no bell on my handlebars. This was a mid-morning on a weekday, with almost no traffic, but that was just the luck of the draw. Policemen interviewed recently have confirmed that they are under orders to spot riders who take their feet off the pedals, or who have no bell. Try getting attention in New York by pinging a bell, by the way. It's all part of the ticket harvest they're expected to reap. The mayor denies there's a quota, which would be unlawful, but he looks and sounds even more like a weasel than unkind nature intended when he admits that there are performance measurements that his police department might be observing. Flinging the bike into my own town car trunk, I proceeded to Bethesda Fountain on foot. The park was wearing its fiery autumn best, but there wasn't a goddamn pigeon in the sky, or in any neighboring branch or twig. So I took a loaf and crumbled it for the swans and ducks on the lake, who flocked and gobbled gratefully. Chucking a few crusts and fragments onto the shore, I did finally manage to attract a small swirl of pigeons, as I might have well done by accident. Pedro Nazario, an 86-year-old man in Morningside Heights, was whacked with a summons for doing it on purpose. The citation specified pigeons, but I would like to know how anyone scattering crumbs can be responsible for the avian species he or she manages to nourish. Old people and children are often fond of feeding birds, but Bloombergism wants them to understand that they'd better stick to sparrows, thrushes, or starlings if they know what's good for them. Deciding on a downtown lunch after this orgy of lawlessness, I asked my town car driver if I could have a cigarette. He was a smoker himself, but he told me that we'd both be breaking the law if we lit it up. The said law defines these cars as enterprises or some such, in any case as mobile containers of atmosphere that can fall under fatherly and authoritarian regulation. For some reason, almost all the drivers of these vehicles were born in Russia or the Ukraine and live in Brighton Beach. I've gotten used to it by now, hearing them say that Bloomberg's attitude reminds them of precisely the mentality that they left home to escape. In an agreeable thug of Chernobyl proportions, his car, his rules. Got a problem with that? We made decent progress through the insane midtown traffic that was attempting to negotiate the mayor's brilliant new no-turning restrictions. Resolving to work up an appetite by breaking a few more laws before lunchtime, I quit the car and descended into the subway. It didn't take me long to pick a seat, put my bag next to me, and prop my leg up and ease these pins and needles, to pause on the steps and adjust my shoe, and in general to undermine civilization as we know it. An Israeli tourist named Yoav Kashida was recently fined $50 for nodding off between stations and implicitly occupying 2 seats by virtue of his slumping. Shalom! Welcome to New York! This is just as illegal if you're on an empty subway car as it is impossible during rush hour. And the joyless and literal mind now ruling City Hall is content to ignore the distinction. No, I wouldn't put my bag or stretch my leg on the next seat when there were fellow riders standing up, but yes, I would if I were all alone, and it's only in the second case that I'd get a ticket. Here we approached the shriveled core of the tiny Bloomberg mind. At rush hour, my fellow passengers and my innate sense of right and wrong would discipline me, and there'd be no room for some ticket-happy inspector to see what was going on, let alone correct it. We'll be back with the victimless crime spree of Christopher Hitchens, plus more stories of peaceful resistance. So let's continue. I got a lot into the story of Christopher Hitchens and his victimless crime spree. He goes on, and he's so eloquent. It's wonderful to hear from him, but he goes on for a bit. He writes a lot of words. I think we get the idea. He went to New York. He broke a lot of rules, and he didn't get in any trouble for any of it in his victimless crime spree. He didn't end up being arrested or even getting a citation. He just broke the rules and then wrote about it. And who knows, if that was 10 years ago, if he did that today, would he be slapped with some sort of fine for breaking the rules? It's unclear.